So I took like a week off to just do life and work and stuff, but my last video was about writing these right behind me, these Chinese spring couplets, and getting ready for Chinese New Year. So in the same vein, I'm going to continue to practice calligraphy because I also want to write more and improve. So I'm going to talk about Chinese calligraphy and how to get started if that's something that you're interested in. Feel free to use the timestamps down below. This is really supposed to be an introduction to Chinese calligraphy, so if you've done it before, maybe skip this video. Maybe I'll talk about more advanced stuff in the future, but yeah. Feel free to skip around as you please. So I started learning Chinese calligraphy for the very first time when I was 16 in China, and I didn't even speak Chinese. I just wanted to try it out. I think it's a great way to get started learning the language and getting interested in Chinese culture and art. So if any of those are something that you're interested in, Chinese calligraphy is a great thing to get started with. So when starting with calligraphy, you'll need 4 essential things, maybe not the 4th one, but we'll talk about that. And these are also called the Wenfang Sibao in Chinese, the 4 treasures of study. And they are Bi, Mo, Zhi, and Yan. In English, those are the brush, the ink, the paper, and the ink stone. So you won't really need an ink stone if you have liquid ink, but you will need something to hold ink in anyways. So you'll need something like that. There are also some extra tools I would recommend. I would recommend getting a mat. The paper that's used in Chinese calligraphy is pretty thin and lightweight, so it's really easy to bleed through, and using some sort of mat to protect your table is a good idea. I would also recommend getting some sort of paperweight or using something as a paperweight. If you get your supplies from a Chinese calligraphy store, they should have paperweights that are made for Chinese calligraphy, and the only difference is that they're long and thin, so you can place them at the top of your paper without like blocking any of your writing area, but you could also use any other long heavy thing like a stapler or a hole punch, something like that. Some other things you might need are a stamp and ink paste. That's if you're interested in stamping your name, and I'll show you some examples of those. These are stamps for stamping your name. I'm not going to do a whole lot with these in this video, but if you're interested in those, I have another video of me actually making this one on my channel. So let's talk about the first tool, which is brushes. A new brush will come like this with the hairs, the fibers glued together. Usually these are animal fur, and let's see, I have a list of common animals that they come from. Weasel, rabbit, deer, goat, pig, tiger, or wolf. I'm not sure which is the most common, but I think most of mine are sheep or wolf hair. I think those are among the most common. This is sheep. It's hard to see because this is an old brush, but this does say sheep on it. If you buy these from a store in America, I'm not sure they will have the animal on them. In fact, most of mine do not, or they've worn off. This also says sheep on it, so maybe sheep is among the most common. So like I said, they'll come new like this. This is an example of a used one that has had ink in it before. When you get them, they'll be, like I said, glued like this. So to use them for the first time, you'll want to break them. Just spin and press and bend in your hands like this. And if you don't do this, it will be like writing with a stick because the thistles won't move at all. The fibers won't move at all. And it won't be able to absorb ink properly. So it'll be like writing with a stick. It's okay if some come loose. And it's okay if they fan out like this. When you get ink in the brush, it will come back to a point. And if it doesn't, if you get a stray hair here or there, just pluck it out. It's okay. I'll talk more about writing methods later, but I would not recommend getting the whole hairs full of ink when you're writing. Just try to get them up to about halfway or even less than that. And another reason for that is because the paper, again, is so thin and lightweight. It's not only going to bleed through, but it'll also feather outwards. So it'll be harder to control. And when you're starting out, might even recommend less ink than normal, because I would recommend writing slower than usual because you're trying to get the hang of things anyways. So if you are going too slow and you have too much ink in the brush, it will spread out faster, just like if you hold a Sharpie down on a piece of paper. Okay, so the next tool we're going to talk about is ink. The traditional ink is an ink stick. I do not have an ink stick, but I'll show you a picture of those. Those are to be used with an ink stone, which again, I do not have, but I'll show you one of those. The ink stick is, I believe, made from soot collected from burning pine trees usually, and pressed and formed into this kind of stick. And usually they have some cool intricate designs on them. They're really fun to use, but they're just inconvenient. So I'm going to be using liquid ink like this. With an ink stick, you'll have an ink stone and you'll place some water in there, and then you'll grind the ink stick on the ink stone in a circular motion like this, and then you'll keep doing that until it thickens up a little bit thicker than water, and you'll have ink. The problem with that is if you run out, you have to regrind. It takes some time to set up, and it's just inconvenient. So I'm going to be using liquid ink like this, and I'm going to place it in a 纸碟, or this little bowl, and super fast and simple. All you have to do is shake and pour. Pretty easy. Most 纸碟, or bowls made specifically for calligraphy, will have a sort of lip that you can use to wipe the excess ink off your brush. And most of those will be ceramic or metal. The final tool I want to talk about is paper. So I just talked about the brush, the ink, and the ink stone. Now I'm going to talk about the last one, paper. And paper for Chinese calligraphy is usually shun paper, which is made from rice. It can also be blended with other things like bamboo or other natural fibers. Sometimes there's gold sprinkled throughout it. You can get tons of different designs and weaves and things like that. So to each their own, get whatever you're interested in, whatever your style is. But for practicing, I would recommend getting this. I used this in my previous video as well. It'll have guidelines, and it's very cheap. It'll help you keep things nice and centered and proportional when you're starting off. This is usually used for students. That's why this will say the year and the date and what grade you're in. But you can use this at home as well. You don't have to be in a class. If you don't want to waste paper when you're starting out, you can also use a water pad. And this is exactly what it sounds like. It's just using water instead of ink, and as the water dries, it will disappear. So you can continue to reuse this over and over again without wasting paper. It's also very clean since there's no ink involved, so even children can use this to practice. Cool, so those are the essential tools needed for Chinese calligraphy. Next, I want to talk briefly about the different types of scripts used for Chinese calligraphy. The script that I've used here is called 楷体 in Chinese, or 楷书in Chinese, either or, and it's just the most modern kind of Chinese calligraphy. They also have a cursive and semi-cursive script called 草书 and 行书. Both of those are great for writing. I would recommend starting with 楷书 first because it's the most similar to modern day Chinese. So if you're just starting out with the language as well, this will help you practice characters that are actually going to be used in your day-to-day life. It's also just much easier to read. Most, I think, Taiwanese and Chinese people cannot read 草书, but yeah, they're very pretty. There are some other scripts too, like clerical script and seal script and bone oracle script, but those are used for usually carvings or metal inscriptions, and they're not really used for calligraphy as often. There are some times you'll see those in calligraphy, like with brush and paper, but it's just less common, and I would recommend focusing on those later if that's something that you're really interested in. The reason I'm telling you this is because if you use a Chinese dictionary, a calligraphy dictionary, they might ask what kind of script you're wanting to find, and 楷体 or 楷书 is what you should be searching when you're starting off. Okay, so let's talk about technique. I'm left-handed, but just try to mirror what I do. You do not hold like a pencil. You're supposed to hold it like this. So the brush will be pushed against your ring finger, and then you use your middle finger to press down, and your thumb to stabilize, and your index finger can also just go up here. Your pinky can rest along your ring finger like that. So to get started, you can push it onto your ring finger and then reach around with your middle finger and your thumb. Index finger goes up like that. So this is how you will write Chinese calligraphy. Posture is important. Sit up straight or stand, even better. But yeah, your elbow should not touch the table traditionally. Of course, you can when you're starting off, but once you've practiced enough and you feel like you're stable, try to avoid letting your elbow touch the table. Of course, I'm not your teacher, so I don't really care if you use your elbow to touch the table, but that's just what is traditionally done. Now, one reason I can use my left hand to write, and it will turn out similarly to somebody who uses the right hand, is because each Chinese character has a specific stroke order and stroke direction. So I should start this character, for example, on this side, and I'm moving this way, and a certain pattern. This is gonna fall. But anyways, each stroke has its own specific direction and order. So if you don't know the specific direction and order to write in, if you haven't learned Chinese before, I'd recommend, like I said earlier, using a calligraphy dictionary. There are online resources for that. You can just look up a character and it'll show you the specific order and direction to write in. You can also sometimes just Google the character and look at Google Images, and sometimes that little graph will show up and makes it a lot easier. So speaking of different strokes, I want to introduce 8 essential strokes using the character Yong. Almost every character in the Chinese language is made up of a limited amount of strokes, just compiled in different ways. And Yong does not have all of them, but it has 8 of the very most common ones. So if you take a calligraphy class, they'll often have you use Yong as a practice character. So with the character Yong, at the top we have Dian, which just means dot. And then we have a horizontal line below that, which is called hung. And then we have a straight line down the middle called shu. The hook at the bottom is called go. And then ti is the top half of this left portion. It goes from right to left. Wan is the next half. It goes from top right to bottom left. And pie is the top half of the right portion. It goes from right to left. And then na is the last stroke, and it goes from top left to bottom right, and it fans out at the end. I'm not sure if I had the tones there correctly. I didn't check beforehand, but I think that's what they are. And so like I said, this does not include every single stroke that is in the Chinese language, but these are some of the most essential ones. So how are these used? An example would be with the characters 1, 2, and 3. These are the characters 1, 2, and 3. These are really just made up of 1, 2, and 3 different hungs. And this character, for example, Wang means king. It's just 3 hungs and a shu. I do want to emphasize that Chinese calligraphy is writing, it's not painting. So try to replicate the characters you see in a calligraphy dictionary to the best of your abilities. I like to think of this quote from Pablo Picasso where he says, learn the rules like a pro so that you can break them like an artist. So after getting the hang of the essentials and the basics, then try to move on to playing with style if you want to. Some other things I want to mention before going are how to practice. I would recommend starting off with the characters that I already listed, like 1, 2, and 3. I would also recommend Wang and Yong, and I'll create a list down below in the description for other characters that are pretty good to practice with starting off before moving on to more difficult characters. When you're practicing, try to pay attention to proportion. Even though san is made up of just 3 hungs, in Kaiti calligraphy in Kaishu, they're not all equal length. They have a slight slant, or they have different proportions. They start off at different points in the grid. Try to use a grid when you're starting off, and keep that in mind just to make it look prettier. I would also recommend really paying attention to where the first stroke starts, because if your first stroke is off center or too low, no matter how perfect the rest of your character is, it's going to be off compared to the rest of them. So that's all the information I'll provide in this video. If you want to see more about Chinese calligraphy, let me know down below. If you have any questions about how to practice or anything that I mentioned here, please let me know. I'll try to provide you with as much accurate information as possible. If you're also interested in seeing more Chinese content or content about East Asia in general, please subscribe and like, and I will see you in a future video. Peace.